Hello, good morning, everyone. And firstly, thank you very much for joining us today on the Securing the Human webinar. We're going to be talking about social engineering, whether we can actually totally secure our users, the limitations of wetware. We're going to give an introduction to human factors, the background of human factors, what they are, how it's used within the MOD, and finally, we're going to talk about how we can use human factors to build a positive security culture to ultimately secure the human. So, I mentioned just then about the background of human factors within the MOD. Why am I talking about the MOD? Well, I work as pre-post sales security consultant for ZeroDayLab, but in my spare time, I am a RAF cyber reservist. This follows on for serving over 13 years with the Royal Air Force, where for the latter part of my career, I delivered human factors training with the RAF, Navy and Army personnel, which ultimately aims to secure the human from a health and safety point of view. Using this experience, I will demonstrate to you how we have helped existing clients secure the human and tools and techniques you can implement in your own environment to better secure your greatest assets. So I mentioned in the agenda, we'll start off with social engineering. So social engineering is the weapon of choice used by cyber criminals to bypass your security fortress. Social engineers are the one attack vector that doesn't really care about where or even who the users are. Regardless of a target's rank or position in an organization, a social engineer will build a profile of them, of their place within an organization to personalize their attack. When gathering evidence on potential victims, they'll use any resource available to them to build an accurate picture of an organization. This information gathering process is known as open source intelligence, or OSINT, or OSINT. These first steps are critical in order for an attacker to select their target. It's a simple process of searching, finding a lead, and then repeating that search again. This attrition of data or information is then used to craft personalized, highly effective attacks. The OSINT kill chain this OSINT kill chain has been adapted for an attacker's point of view. At the point of target selection, an attacker will begin to profile their potential victims, choosing who within an organization they will attack. The data harvesting will include various automated collection methodologies, looking at public records, forums, and even darknet searches. Attackers will employ various data processing techniques, and the enrichment process will aggregate an attacker's OSINT gathering. The data analysis The data analysis will link the evidence gathered, and if necessary, further searches can be made, considering the new information. Ultimately, the process visualizes how information can be used to target an individual or company. Previously, I have blogged about securing the human and how social engineering can cause some CIOs, CISOs, information security heads to begin to shake and tremble. Social engineers can attack at any time, at work, at home, when your user is out socializing. They can bring malware into the business through being tricked by a skilled social engineer. And although security awareness training is much agreed by the InfoSec community as the best way to combat the social engineer, our users can still make mistakes. After all, we are only human. Not to forget the resilient challenge of even getting your senior leadership to acknowledge the need for security awareness. My other, more recent blog, Battle Plans, will give you the top 5 missions an organization must undertake to effectively heighten your user security awareness. Accomplishing those top 5 missions will make you more resilient to attack, but we can do better. As human beings, we will continue to make mistakes. So what can we do as an organization to prevent or limit the damage inflicted by these mistakes? As Rag and Bone Man once put, I'm only human after all, don't put your blame on me. But why as human beings, why do we make these mistakes? Well, the answer has to include the consideration of human factors. So what are human factors? Well, in a list, here they are. These elements affect our interaction with the workplace and other people and our overall productivity and performance. Let's take a quick look at a couple of the most frequent ones. As you can see, an attacker has a wide horizon of common attack vectors he or she could exploit. Communication. I'll mention the importance of communication throughout the webinar because it is so widely mishandled. But how do we define communication? Well, communication is the receiver understanding the message as the sender intends it. Bearing in mind, we have two main venues for this communication, written and verbal. The message we want to convey to our users, either written or verbally, must be clear, and they must understand the message as we intend it. Fatigue. What happens to our productivity when we're tired, either physically or mentally? It obviously degrades. Situational awareness. Sometimes we as human beings lose sight of the bigger picture when we're focused on the minutiae. Another big one is assumption. How often have you ever been privy to, oh, I just assumed you'd do it, or I assumed that it would have been there? There is a saying, to assume makes well, I'm sure you've heard it. But for everyone's favourite, let's look at stress as a brief example. Stress is a physiological and or emotional reaction to stimuli. We need stress to perform at peak. As we're all aware, too much stress is negative. People burn out, they make mistakes, etc. But not enough stress is also dangerous. Boredom, for example, the old saying, the devil makes work for idle hands. Yerkes Dodson curve shows us at what point we as human beings are at optimum performance or arousal, as Dodson likes to say. Our reaction to stress will be different for everyone, but ultimately it takes us back to our core base instinct, back to fight or flight. Everyone's curve will be different for different situations. In a brand new position, your stress levels may already be in overload. Think about the last time you tried to learn a new skill or been dropped in at the deep end. Your mind and pulse begins to race, palms become sweaty. You either choose consciously or unconsciously to run or face the challenge head on, fight or flight. Regardless of your choice, after a while, the stress dissipates and your brain begins to function much better as you move back to the optimum arousal stage. The initial stress level will depend on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs shows us how, if outside influences mess with the base of the pyramid, the reaction to stress will be more severe. Let's have a look. Physiological, most important. These needs must be satisfied for human survival. Air, water, food, clothing, shelter, those sorts of things. Safety, personal security, financial security, health and well-being, safety net against accidents, illness, etc. Takes into account any physical stressors such as noise, temperature, lighting, vibration, physical work. Love and belonging, especially important in childhood, friendship, intimacy, family. Humans need to feel a sense of belonging and family in social groups. Esteem, feel respected, self-esteem and self-respect, and self-actualization. There's an old saying, doesn't mean to be sexist in any way, but what a man can be, he must be. Everyone must be encouraged to reach their full potential. This is how we get the best out of our people. Interesting point to note though, there's been some research that suggests that millennials, those born after the year 2000, value connection to the internet as being more important than physiological needs. I can't believe this might be true, but hang on, I just need to update my Instagram. So how does Maslow's hierarchy, for instance, align to the workplace? Well, we need to take into account the shell model. So software. Software is the box of standards, the policies and the like that tell us how to effectively carry out our job. Are they clear or ambiguous? Think back to communication. Is this method of communication effective? If you believe it is, how have you tested it? Hardware, the physical equipment used in the execution of our job. Are they in good working order, or are we likely to obtain an injury by them? The environment, the physical environment, heat or cold stresses, cramped conditions. We are animals essentially. We need to be comfortable in our environment to work effectively. Liveware, physiological environment. What stresses on your mind? Money worries being the most common. How will these affect how well you do your job? Think about fatigue here also. Do we have members of the team working long hours? And what will be the effects on information security because of that? And lastly, liveware to liveware. People interacting with people. How often has the message been misinterpreted, which has led to heightened stress? I can think of once or twice, mostly surrounding the assumptions piece we talked about earlier. Remember standards. The standard I'm willing to walk past is the standard I'm willing to accept. Are your policies clearly understood by your users? Is the way that your users carry out everyday activities circumventing these policies? If yes, why? Effective communication is the receiver understanding a message exactly as the sender intended, which is obviously not the case for this guy. So we touched on the Ministry of Defence earlier. We're going to talk a little bit more about it now. The Ministry of Defence Human Factor Training aims to ultimately reduce errors that lead to fatal or near fatal accidents. The same premise can be applied to cybersecurity in a way that we can aim to secure our users. If we look at the cybersecurity posture of most organisations at the minute, we could expect to see many unreported opportunities, which potentially result in many near misses or close calls. All it takes is for a collection of unreported incidents to gather together and produce the opportunity for a breach to occur. Error management is how we can try and either learn from past failings or even prevent errors before they're made. An effective error management system can be used at any level. It looks to block up or stop opportunities for errors to be made and learn from errors that have already been made, both within the organisation and what is happening in the world around us. Similar to patch management, look at how other companies have been breached. Taking remedial action will prevent that organisation from being you. So back to the iceberg, error management will look to reduce the likelihood of data breach by reporting near misses and unreported incidents, such as policy not being followed or phishing email landing on a user's inbox. An effective error management system will show errors are not random events. If you've made a mistake or the system has failed you, chances are someone else has experienced the same. The ICO reports that 4 of the top 5 causes of data breaches is because of human and process failings. That's a lot. These incidents include loss or theft of paperwork and devices, or data posted or emailed to incorrect recipients. This could be the result of an inaccurate or ambiguous work instruction. An effective error management system will show these recurring patterns presented by the holes in this Swiss cheese model. These will give the trending analysis of where we have a high likelihood of errors and ultimately our highest risk of unauthorized information disclosure or data breach. Willis Towers Watson article, cyber risk, it's a people problem too. The 4th challenge is failure to report. This challenge shows that over a third of all employees have witnessed co-workers behaving in ways inconsistent with data privacy and information security policies. However, of these, only 47% and 53% in the UK and US respectively reported the incident to a manager or IT department. Through implementing effective error management, users are encouraged to report all potential errors, near misses, ambiguous or inaccurate work instructions, which may result in the production of an error. These reports are submitted to management for review, and they will implement where possible, but most importantly, management will give the users feedback on their report. Without this vital feedback, users will either stop using the error management system, or in the case where they have reported an error in a work instruction, they may continue to keep using it incorrectly, bypassing your preventative security controls. The error management looks to block the route for potential error and prevent the breach. In order for this to be effective, we need to come to a conclusion that errors are unintended. An error is an action that does not go according to plan. They are natural. We will make errors. What happens though when we make these errors? It's mostly bad outcomes, right? Stress levels rise, ultimately degradation of performance. Think back to the past when someone has made a mistake. How do we as human beings react? Traditionally, we tend to blame people. What would happen if you was faced with this error message? We'd be looking for the guy responsible, right? So we could blame them. Why do we blame? You don't have to look very far in the papers or media to see that effectively it gives the problem to someone else. It's not my fault, it's John from accounts, for example. The benefits of blame, it gives Joe Public someone to have a go at, basically. It provides closure, it calms any public outrage and ensures the problem goes away quickly. And it is easy to do. It's easy to get the pitchforks out, not unlike how experts did. The now former CEO, Richard Smith, said at the time, an individual did not ensure communication got to the right person to manually patch the application. Rough translation of that means blaming the IT guy. The thing is, he's not completely wrong, but is the blame culture exactly how we want to move forward? What's the negatives of blame? It can lead to a systematic breach of process. If you blame a user for clicking on a link in a phishing email, ultimately they may not look forward to coming to work. It links back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You will not get the most out of your people if the failings of an organization is blamed on a single person. Remember, cyber risk is not just an IT department problem. It's a business issue. If a user makes a mistake in the future, they're less likely to own up because of the cultural effect that has been perpetuated throughout the organization. The result being that we will have gaps in our Swiss cheese unplugged. Potential errors will go unchallenged. But what about the future? Not forgetting blame does nothing to ensure the problem does not happen again. Brushes the real reason under the carpet, but it also sets the standard for other colleagues to accept. How do we want to move forward? What does the future hold for us? We need to change people's thinking. By changing people's thinking, changes the attitude of the organization, which will ultimately herald a cultural change within your organization. That being said, we do need to make the difference between errors, mistakes, and violations. If a user has subverted the rules for personal gain, they need to be held accountable for their actions. So, an error, like we said earlier, an error is an unintended action with unintended outcomes. A mistake, unintended actions with unintended outcomes without the user knowing any better, and it's very important at this stage that we differentiate between those two. Organizational gain, actions carried out for the benefit of the organization. I'll give you an example of that later. And violations, deliberate deviation from the policies via intentional outcomes with intended or unintended outcomes. Now we've differentiated between error, mistake, organizational gain, and violations. We need to go ahead and apply a process of accountability. So you get a report in that says that you've got an area for error or an area for maybe a breach. We need to look at this situation and think to ourselves, right, were the rules intentionally broken? If no, was a correct plan of action selected? Did they select the right process to carry out that job? If yes, it's an error. There's still work to do though, it doesn't just stop there. We need to review our policies and amend our box of standards. Maybe the policy is ambiguous in any way. If no, so they knew there was a correct plan of action they should have selected, but they didn't actually go via that plan. It's a mistake, and we need to educate them to say, look, this is why we have these policies. This is why you should use them in future. Were the rules intentionally broken? If yes, given the environment at the time of the incident, could all rules be enforced? So think about applications. They are developed in accordance with stringent deadlines. It may be company policy, and most probably should be company policy, that all applications are tested before release. If a developer team decide to release the application without it being tested, for an example, due to those tight deadlines, this is an example of organizational gain. Although this might be short-term, as foregoing the security process may result in the application being hacked. So the development team that we just talked about there, they were rule breaking for organizational gain. They were rule breaking for short-term organizational gain to get that application or that piece of software out the door in accordance with the deadline. So how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Well, we review our box of standards. What was the box of standards surrounding that software development process? Next time, we should allow more time for the development process. If yes, was the action of benefit to the individual? No, they were doing it for the organization. Again, we need to look at the environment and see if we can review that shell model. If yes, was there malicious intent for the act? If no, selfish rule breaking violation, we need to educate that individual to say, this is why we have the box of standards. This is why we need to stick by those in future. If yes, possibly we've detected insider threat, and that would be something that security staff need to investigate. From the previous process of accountability, we've got 3 outcomes. The first one, review of policies, back to that shell model, the software element. The policies that we use to carry out our day-to-day jobs. Information security, BYOD, physical access, the list goes on. Any policy that is convoluted or hard to understand can lead to the message becoming misinterpreted. Education, used to retrain individuals or even a group who have violated the policy. Give them the reasons why the policy is like it is. Make them aware of threats posed to an organisation. If it's a group that is continuously breaking the rules, security awareness training should be used. Maybe instant response training. There's a whole raft of training options that can be employed to impart the knowledge of threats posed to the users and the organisation. For further reading, I urge you to look up the Battle Plans blog, which I referenced earlier. In this blog, I show the top 5 missions an organisation must undertake to improve their resilience to cyber attack. You might also need to look at groups who have a high likelihood of being targeted in a cyber attack. So don't forget about HR departments or anyone that deals with finance, those sorts of people. Insider, selfish rule breaking with malicious intent, not unlike the breach that Coca-Cola recently suffered. For those unaware, the home brand suffered a data breach of nearly 8,000 workers' personal details. A former employee was found in possession of an external hard drive containing the personal information which appeared to have been stolen from Coca-Cola. The employee took the files when he left the company. This highlights the importance of having clear and rigorous hiring and clearing procedures. What does your privacy and acceptable usage policy say about handling personal data and hardware assets of your company? When was the last time your users were trained on the risks presented by the cyber domain? This is especially important when we're trying to change the culture of our organization. By getting the basics right, it actively demonstrates to the workforce how serious information security is to your business. This could potentially act as a preventative control measure to foil an insider attack before it even happens. So, back to proactive error management. Policies have been reviewed and implemented. Training has been administered with repetition of training set in policy. Instant response plans have been reviewed and a schedule to test the plans has been implemented. The organisation has set the tone for information security. The next step is getting the users to actively use a proactive error management system. If we go with the carrot and stick metaphor, the process of accountability would be our stick almost. So let's concentrate on the carrot for now. What rewards are available to us to show our users we appreciate their efforts to safeguard the information? How often do you tell your users they did well, especially when they have helped to enforce positive security culture within your organization, i.e. they positively and identified and reported a phishing email? They suggested new ways of working to plug those gaps in the Swiss cheese model we discussed earlier. Do you have a system in place with that? Can we implement a safest user or best idea reward? Similar to the employee of the month, this positive reinforcement will show the users that the system works, that their valuable ideas are appreciated by the organization. This goes back to Maslow's hierarchy. The esteem, the need to feel respected by your peers, will ultimately help push those users to the self-esteem or self-actualization, the very top of the pyramid. What about if we could give our users a pat on the back without them actually knowing about it? An organisation that we work with, who shall remain nominal, had a clear desk policy. The head of IT security placed a suite on the desk of users who abided by the clear desk policy. The users who didn't began to notice the suites on some desks, then unconsciously started to tidy their desk, almost socially engineering our users into abiding by policy or buying into an error management system. Unconscious positive reinforcement, that's the key. So, if we combine the process of accountability, the stick, and positive reinforcement, either conscious or unconscious, or even better, a combination of both as the carrot, you will notice that the thinking of the users will begin to change. Their attitudes towards security will no longer be negative in nature. From this, we can build a positive security culture within the organization. To best change the thinking of users and therefore the culture of the organization, which will safeguard the business IP and other confidential data as best as possible, we need to rely heavily on the carrot, the positive reinforcement. Make the reward be at the forefront of our users' mind in their day-to-day life. Make security a second nature to them as breathing is. By making it second nature, the risk of breach due to human error will be absolutely minimized. Make your users the strongest link instead of your weakest. Remember, only you can drive change in your organization. Okay, so I've got a question. So if we take security away, we have care of personnel. I'm not sure I completely understand that. If you could reword it, that would be great. I'm not suggesting that we take security away. Okay, so you're talking about how important it is to have clear policies. What are some of the key policies you'd expect to see? Okay, so key policies really that we'd expect to see, what we'd expect to see within any organisation. So if you have bring your own device, for example, we need to we need to make sure that that is written, it's formally found, and everybody needs to know where that is. We can't expect our users to have to abide by policies if they're not even aware of where they are. So everybody needs to know that. Any more questions? And as well, so building out from the key policies, we need to think about things like instant response as well, BCP policies, those sorts of things. So we need to have policies in place to make sure that our organisation can continue to function. So we need to have disaster recovery, all that sort of stuff, all part of that. What percentage can you increase security awareness by given training? It depends on what sort of testing matrices you're using for those. So it depends. So really, ideally, what we would like to do is deploy a phishing simulation, give the organisation the security awareness training after that, and then post phishing again after. So then we can actually show the metrics, and sometimes it's gone up by like 40%. So we're quite happy with that. Industry average should be between 10 and 12%, I believe. Okay, so are there best practice models for organisation and management governance to include social engineering and human factors? Understand, review, and change. So best practice models for organisation and management governance to include social engineering. Presently, no. Human factors, I believe, within cybersecurity industry is a relatively new concept. I certainly haven't heard it with anybody else, so there isn't any best practice models for that. ZeroDayLab can certainly help anybody who wishes to implement human factors within their organisation. So it's better to do awareness training after the mindset is changed regarding security. No, I would say that it's always best to do ongoing awareness training. So get your shell model right. So get your shell model right in terms of get your policies in place to say, this is how we do security awareness training, this is how often we're going to continue doing it, and it's going to be an ongoing change. So we would like to baseline where people are at the moment, baseline where they are in terms of how easily they could recognize a phishing email, give them the security awareness training, and then see what changes they've actually made through the security awareness training. Okay, so I've got quite a lengthy question here. Detecting insider, behavioural change, problems at work and/or interpersonal environment precede technical risk indicators. Over 80% of insiders already had official attention for concerning behaviours, violation of rules, policies, practices of appropriate interpersonal behaviour. 58% communicate negative feeling, grievance into harm the organisations or a member prior to conducting an attack. 31% of cases, others had specific knowledge of the insider's attack, intention plans or activities, including co-workers, friends, family. Would it be fair to say that if we pay more attention to carer personnel, we detect the insider sooner? Absolutely, absolutely. And it goes back to the positive reinforcement. So what about that workforce that has reported this person? Yeah, they say, look, I'm really concerned about John Smith, for example. I'm really concerned about his activities. I've noticed him bypassing several policies. I've noticed he's been doing this or that, you know, all that bad stuff. What about the thank you that we can give to that individual and then address those issues? So if we as an organisation start then to cut back his privileges, the potential insider's privileges, that not only safeguards the organisation, but it makes the person who reported it feel great, yeah. And then you've got the self-esteem, self-respect, self-actualization of that person, and then their attitude towards security will be much higher. Are we talking about multiple awareness trainings? Security awareness training, I believe ISO 27001 says it should be an annual requirement, but we would always sort of say, yeah, annual is great, but let's try and get it on a more regular basis if we can. And don't forget, security awareness training isn't just, you know, somebody coming in and standing up in front of the organisation talking about the threat actors and things like that. It can be personalised towards groups and departments, and even so we always sort of say about starting with the C-level, the C-suite, and then working our way from there. Can an organisation be assessed for its current exposure to human factor risk? It'd be quite a difficult thing to do, but what we could do is say, at the minute, is sort of take it from a sort of like a maturity model and say, right, at the minute you don't have anything that addresses human factors, so we're not really, you know, concentrating on human factors per se, but we need to look at implementing an effective error management system. So we say, right, you haven't got an error management system at the moment, however, we can give you a hand in setting one up, and this will be the benefits as been highlighted in this webinar. Concerning social engineering best practices, we've learned that create, understand their own behavioural characteristics and thinking strategic, the ones that are manipulated most often, best personal, can detect their own derailing indicators sooner. Most insiders do not want to make mistakes, would you agree? Yeah, most insiders do not want to make mistakes, but it's human error, especially if an insider's trying to sneak around and subvert it. You've got to think about the pressure that they're under as well. So how much pressure there'll be in to sort of say, right, I really want to perform an attack, an insider attack. There's so many things that could go wrong if the culture of the organisation is security focused and they want their organisation to succeed and they want to protect the information. So you've got to think about the pressure that would be on that insider. So we go back to why people make mistakes in the first place, stress being the most common. So we would, if you're surrounded in an organisation that just best wants to protect the information, A, you're unlikely to have an insider in the first place, but B, if you do decide to have an insider, or sorry, not if you decide to have an insider, if an insider decides to attack the organization, then everybody can sort of, work together as a team and really sort of thwart that attack before it even happens. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you want to have any more information, you should have my contact details, or at least you can email the office and certainly get my contact details. And if you want to have any more conversations about this, I'd be happy to. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for your questions. They were really, really good. Oh, we've got one more. Oh, and thank you, Andrew Badger. There we go. So yeah, thank you, Andrew, for putting it together. Thanks again for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.